Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Film Roundtable. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Maria Prieto. I'm one of the co-founders of Film Roundtable, and I am incredibly thrilled to be joined by these very talented cinematographers today. We have Nico Aguilar and Gavin Kelly. Gavin's recent work includes the acclaimed Apple TV anthology series, Little America, and Emmy Award-winning series, WU-TANG, An American Saga. His formative cinematography on the pilot helped create the look and tones of the series and evolved along the cinematic storytelling in the Wu universe. Prior to this, Gavin was a DP on 4 cinematic seasons of the renowned anthology series, American Horror Story. His feature work includes films honored at many top international film festivals, including Sundance, South by Southwest, Toronto, and Tribeca. Gavin, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
And alongside Gavin, I'm thrilled to welcome back Nico Aguilar. Nico's recent work focuses on a wide range of long-form projects in both television and film. He recently finished the Netflix film CHUPA, directed by Jonas Cuaron and produced by Chris Columbus. Prior to that, he shot Charlie Day's feature debut, El Tonto, and the 21 Pilots live stream experience. Nico has also worked second unit for some of the most renowned filmmakers in the industry on projects for Marvel, Apple, and Hulu. Nico, thanks for always saying yes when I invite you to chat with me on one of these.
Are you kidding me? Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor.
Oh, and okay, is that Winnie behind you for those listening?
That is Winnie behind me for any dog lovers that are listening. A little fun perk for, yep.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
For the viewers, you're able to see her. For the listeners, we can just describe how adorable she is.
Yes. She keeps me sane.
Yes. Yeah. Big therapy dog. All right. Well, I obviously listed off some, big accomplishments with both of you. Your work speaks for itself, but I always like to get a little bit further into the origin stories, into those early days of inspiration. So Gavin, I'd love for you to take us a little bit into your background. What was that initial spark that led you to this path ultimately of, cinematography?
Let's see. Well, I'm from San Diego, California, so not too far away from where we are now. But yeah, I don't know. I grew up, I was an only child, actually. So in retrospect, at the time, I had friends and stuff hung out, but I realized I just spent a good amount of time kind of in my head, kind of in my own imagination when I was really young, which I think, who knows? I don't want to over psychoanalyze myself, but definitely was always kind of creating, stories and characters in my head. And I read a lot, and I was kind of very kind of an introvert. And then, as I kind of, grew older and, kind of matured teenage years and stuff. I had a camera in my hand a lot. My dad, was an amateur photographer, but, when I think about like family trips and, family events and everything, he always had a camera, my grandfather as well. So I think there's something there, I don't know if I really consciously knew about it, but I had a camera in my, still camera in my hand pretty young. And then in high school, make, movies with my friends with like a little high-8 camera. This is in the 90s, not, high-8 camcorders and, all that stuff. So even though I wasn't taking it, frankly, too seriously early on, it was just something fun and I love being creative with my friends. I think, it's those formative years, just being comfortable with the camera, just starting to intuitively work with the camera, even if it's making, silly home movies or something, or little, where you're cutting in camera, you know what I mean? Okay, okay, now everybody, turn around, we're going to do, I didn't know what a reverse shot was at the time. I didn't know what to call it, but like, okay, now, just having watched, so many films and TV, it's just kind of intuitively, okay, this must be how you put things together in a very rudimentary way. So, yes, that was kind of high school. And then I ended up going to UCSD, the visual arts program in San Diego, which I loved. It's very arts driven. It's kind of, conceptual, experimental, kind of cross, just interdisciplinary a little bit. A lot of theory, a lot of critical study, like all of that kind of merged together. But what was great about it as undergrad is it was just a great explorative time. Like, we shot 16 and video. Again, this was like late 90s, and cut. You were cutting on film then. We were cutting like early days, pre-final cut, like Media 100. You're cutting tape to tape. We did all this. It was like a mix. it's kind of like at that transition, of course, of very early digital, still coming from film, shot a lot of 16, but it was an opportunity to kind of just explore without, thinking and really too much at that time about a career or anything. I didn't necessarily know I wanted to be a cinematographer specifically. That was all about, it was very kind of, everybody's a filmmaker, and at that time I was directing like every other student, writing, but I was definitely drawn towards the camera and shoot other students' projects, and it was always kind of, I kept coming back to being the most comfortable behind the camera.
Mhm.
And so that was really kind of a formative experience. And then was fortunate from that program to go actually straight into USC, the graduate program, which was amazing, and kind of, when I look back on it now, is coming from coming from very experimental kind of conceptual arts-based program to, of course, SC, which is kind of the powerhouse of, everything. There's everything in the SC program, and you kind of find your niche, but it's also, introducing you into the Hollywood system, and, kind of deeper delve into, kind of the classic Hollywood approach. And so it was great. That's where I really decided I want to be a cinematographer, was at SC. Again, same kind of thing. I went in as a, writer, director, was making films. And then I really just said, I love cinematography. This is where my strongest passion is. I feel like as a kind of key collaborator, that's where my drive is. I love the collaborative aspect of it, the kind of chemical reaction of working with the director and all the other departments. And it's kind of this alchemy kind of magic that I love as a GP. So that's kind of where it took off from there. So shot, everything I could in film school and thesis films and all that, and came out of film school with just a big drive to keep shooting. So, I crewed in different departments, a little bit in camera, a bit in grip and electric, but really just tried to start shooting everything I could early on, for the first few years, paid, non-paid, just try to get experience, build connections, networks, all that kind of stuff, and shot indie films for which I love for quite a few years, and just somewhat recently, in the past like 6 or 7 years, stepped into episodic, because there's so many great, now we're in kind of the extreme edge version of episodic, where there's so much content, I hate that word, but so many series and miniseries and programs that it's kind of, it's overwhelming. But at that time, it was so early enough, a lot of filmmakers that I knew or kind of contemporaries were stepping in from, indie features into episodic at that time, because those were a lot of the exciting material, like directors, DPs, really ever, even, talent was also, so I was like, okay, let's be great to see if I can, have an opportunity to step into that world, and shot a couple episodic pilots and stuff. And then, but the first years I really stepped into in a big way was Horror Story, actually, American Horror Story. And a friend and colleague of mine, Nelson Craig, was shooting in the Ryan Murphy universe there. He shot the OJ series, American Crime Story, some other series, and was doing a bit of Horror Story one season, then had to step away, and there was kind of a shuffle with timing and everything. So I shot some additional photography and units, and then, long story short, I ended up on that show and shot half of a season, and ended up shooting 3 other seasons, and just had it was a really big opportunity career-wise, but also just, it's I don't know how much you know about the show, but it's a wild ride of a show. It's horror, but there's action. It's obviously the drama. It's everything is. And every season is it's an anthology, right? So that was what the huge draw was, when I was asked back for the second season, the third season, it's every season, okay. Obviously, within this American Horror Story, there's a certain kind of aesthetic, there's a whole history in terms of that universe, but every season does allow you to have a bit of a reset, and you're in a new world, a new time period, new palette, new approaches visually and stuff. And then from there, started shooting more episodic pilots and series like the WU-TANG series and Little America, and so that's a long, kind of drawn out answer, but hopefully that gets us somewhere.
No,
Yeah,
I love that. Oh my God. Just hearing the appetite that you had as soon as you realized, like, oh, this is where I fit. This is the role I want to take. And you just, out the gates, we're just shooting, like, just, it's that hunger that I think really is what can propel you to greatness. And I love, there's a couple bits when you were talking about shooting on, like, the DV cameras with your friends. one of my favorite memories was my birthday party when I was 9. My parents put together a film shoot, and my dad wrote a script, like a 5-page script. And I think I'd invited 10 girls, but he didn't want to write 10 roles. He wrote 5 roles, and they used trickery, like in-camera trickery. So basically, the girls would be like one role for the first half of the film, and then he would like cut, and then they would turn into like the same character, but it would just like switch people. And
Oh my gosh, I love it.
It was one of those moments where I remember we were losing light because me and my friends were just having so much fun in the backyard. My dad, he was shooting and he was stressing out. Like he was treating it as if we were truly in a production. But it was amazing. It was so fun. And yeah, I think that's what I still find so exciting when you're on a set and it still feels like you're playing and you're with your friends and it still feels like make believe and anything could happen. And now we just get, bigger toys, but when you're with people and collaborators that truly are on that wavelength, it does feel like you're 10 years old and you're just using your imagination.
Absolutely.
Nico, well, the other thing I wanted to ask actually, Gavin, is would your dad, you mentioned he was kind of a bit of an amateur photographer, would he develop his own film? Did he have a
Oh, I'm interested in that question too.
Yeah, no, honestly, no. My dad has a great, he has a great eye, but it really is, now he's into Photoshop and all that stuff, but at the time, obviously this is all film. But no, honestly, not development. I don't think he was that kind of deep into it. It's more, I don't know. It's, again, it was a lot of, we would, take family trips, and fortunately, like my parents loved to travel and we traveled a lot. And that was also a big part of, I don't want to digress, but that was, those two went together, I guess, kind of, it's like, there's this exploratory kind of curious nature, that went with the, kind of coalesced with the photography a bit, it was like observing and taking it in and trying to find, find the right perspective of how the camera can capture a moment or sense of, I'm film schooling a little bit. It wasn't like that, but like what does this feel like? What does this moment feel like in a new place that we haven't been, or this world or this environment or or people? So it was like, it came a lot from that. I think that was part of the nature of it as well. But no, he didn't develop anything. It was all film. But he was definitely like the tourist photographer with the the cameras and I have a picture of my grandpa as well. He'd have the camera and all the lenses. It's very kind of like, oh, here comes the tourist, that kind of thing. So, but I think I got a lot from that. And then when I started picking up a camera on my own, and I think the storytelling with, like you said, with the handy cam, with the DV cameras and all that was actually a big part of it too. Because as soon as you're hands on with something like that, it's just trial and error, right? It's just kind of like, how can we make this shot, without really knowing what you're doing, you're just kind of stumbling through it, but you are learning and developing a sense of what can work and what not work, and how to make people do that. Yeah, exactly. What about you, Nico, in terms of your first experiences with the camera?
No, I honestly want to jump in on the DV cam thing that you're mentioning, because when you're talking about that, it made me remember that when I started like shooting on my DV camera, I only had one tape. So I kept re-recording over that tape. And by the way, that wasn't my tape. That was my parents' tape.
Yep.
And they recorded this conference. And so the other day I was, looking over it because I was so curious, like, oh my God, this is my beginning, And I'm looking over it and it's the weirdest thing, because the first 5 seconds, it's the conference. It's like very, serious Mexican, just saying like, oh, the trees of Mexico, blah, 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 blah. And then it cuts to my face, just like, bam, like a 9-year-old face being like, trying to like act, because I was also my own actor. So I would like hold the camera and be like, where am I? I'm in this crazy world. And I'd pan the camera and my dog would be there. And then it would, of course, cut again, and it would be back to the conference, and it'd be like, Los Árboles de México. And then it would cut again, and it would be like me and my friends, like doing this short film. And it's really funny because it's so inconsistent, but I could see all these little films and all these little chapters that I would shoot on that one DV tape. And it made me remember, because you're right, it is such an exploratory phase that has this, number one, it has this element of wonder, because you're like, oh my God, I'm recording what's in front of me in this tape forever, and that idea of recording something forever, capturing it, was incredible. And then the second layer to that is I get to choose what part of what's in front of me I get to capture. And then the third layer to it is what I choose in front of me to capture, and how I move the camera around and what I'm filming is going to influence the audience's feeling or perspective on what's going on. Of course, I didn't have the language to recognize this, but I knew that there was something really interesting going on whenever I would hold a camera and, choose to zoom in on something or whatever. And I guess that's kind of been a really big part of my origins, because I feel like growing up, the camera always had this gravitational pull towards me, where no matter what I was doing or what point in my life I was, somehow it would just always draw me back to the camera, to filmmaking, or to image making. And that was really interesting. When I was 9 years old, I was living in New York City, and I remember being absolutely obsessed with two people that have nothing to do with each other. One of them was Jim Carrey, and the other one was the painter Botero. And equal admiration, by the way, which is, it should tell you so much about a kid's mind, that, I didn't really separate them in my head. I was just like, they're both so cool. One of them paints this amazing big creatures, and then the other one's this hilarious actor. And I was like drawn to both worlds. And what was confusing for me at the time is that I didn't really know what about the two worlds was really drawing me. And I think what it was an ability to express yourself, because they're both very graphic in how they express themselves in their medium, but they both rely on the image to express themselves. And that, I think, was ultimately, when I grew up, what I realized was really drawing me to both. And fun fact, I think for my birthday, my dad got me the chance to go to his apartment and have lunch with him. Botero's, not Jim Carrey. And I know it would have been great for Jim Carrey, but I guess he couldn't pull it off. No. And it was actually incredible meeting Botero so young, because it was just someone that I really admired, but getting closer to that, artistic energy, to me was extremely influential and very, very inspiring. And yeah, I just kept getting pulled to the camera. One of my family friends, Flor Garduño, would, always sort of not teach me per se about the camera, but just in conversation, I realized there's a lot of amazing jewels of knowledge that I would get that I really appreciated. And I didn't want to be a photographer back then. I didn't want to be a cinematographer back then, because I didn't know what that was. But I knew that all these little pieces kind of made sense to me. And then another funny story is my mom was the Minister of Culture in Mexico. And I was, every time that I'd go, hang out around her office, I'd be really restless. I still am. I'm always fidgeting and stuff. And she'd be like, oh my God, like, you're so restless. Like, why don't you go run? And I was like, I don't want to go run. It's like, why don't you go play? And I don't want to go do it. And then she finally said, like, you know what? I'm going to give you a job. Go across the street and work in this old movie theater and just learn a few things. It'll be fun. It'll be like, you'll go do things. So I was the assistant to the projectionist of this old 35 millimeter movie theater.
How old were you?
I have no idea. I was probably like 14.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
By this age. And that guy was brutal on me. Like he was like, oh great, free labor, let's go.
Right.
And he'd be like, catalog all these films, and he'd take me to the basement, and there's all these old spools of film, and he'd be like, just pull them out, look them against the light, like find out what the title is, make sure that that coincides with the can. If it's really, really degraded, let me know, and we can, I don't know how they would clean it or anything. And then, we'd have these showings, which were a big, big deal, because we'd have to obviously prep the reels, get them ready, and I'd have to be there and see him do this act of changing the reels, changing the projectors right on time. And that was very exciting to me. Like, I didn't necessarily get to do the changing of the reels because I don't think he trusted me yet, but just watching it and being behind the scenes and looking at the film and celluloid and realizing, oh my God, there's thousands of these little images, but somehow if you play them really fast against the light, it just looks like this seamless image. And just being around that to me was also extremely fascinating. And I think through my upbringing, I kept like piecing together all these things that always were, had this gravitational pull for me. And it wasn't until I went to college and I met you, Maria, and I left Mexico and came to the US, that I realized that all these pieces had been leading me to cinematography, and more specifically beyond cinematography to storytelling. And that was visual storytelling. And that was great to feel when I finally like arrived and started doing that. I realized, oh my God, this makes sense. This made sense before. I just didn't realize it, but now I have a name for it. I have sort of a journey. Yeah.
I love that.
Nico, I am so curious how different your life would be if it had been Jim Carrey who you got lunch with.
I know, right? I know.
Complete different life path.
Yes, thank goodness I didn't meet him, because my life does not belong in front of the camera. It only belongs behind it.
You touched on this, but yesterday we were talking a little bit about your early influences with Flor de Garduño. And I mean, what a privilege to have, grown up amongst such a talented force. But you were describing a little bit about her process and, her use of single source light and how that truly fascinated you. And I'd love for you to kind of just share a little bit about that, because I just thought it was so beautiful.
Yeah, what's interesting about Flor is that, her photography is so simple in the elements of it, but the way she uses these elements, and by elements I mean the background, the light, the composition, the subject, the props, like all these elements that she's using are simple. You look at them and you know exactly what they are, and they're single objects. A lot of the time it's a single person. But in her arrangement of things, it's incredibly complex, and it has this elegance that looks simple, but is actually extremely, extremely complex. And again, this is something I realized later, but when the times I was lucky enough to be around her and hear her talk about photography, I would really recognize that she would rely on, I think, these simple elements because they told a story immediately, and they sort of embrace certain natural aspects of the story she was trying to tell that were also very appropriate. Like the fact that she includes nature and nude bodies, but she also includes a very natural background and natural light, is all creating this cohesive, vision. And again, like for photography that has so many tools and so many lights and, so many different lenses and so many different cameras and everything, it can be very overwhelming. And seeing someone that is so effective at using such simple elements and yet making it look better than any light could ever make it look was very, very impactful to me. And so the times I was able to, you know, be at her house and see that wall that she would photograph against and see how the light would come in, or hear her talk about it, or seeing a camera that she'd be using. I mean, all these things were I guess embedding seeds in my brain that I, of course, 100% thank her for, because subconsciously they were giving me this sensibility to those natural elements that she uses so well. And that now in my cinematography, I'm able to recognize that subconscious influence in my own, you know, aesthetics.
Yeah, no, even, you know, whenever I'm starting to prep a new project, the first thing I'll go to is photography books and, you know,
Yeah.
get inspiration from, you know, art or prints or photographers that I really admire. And I kind of want to dive into both of your prep processes. And Gavin, starting with you, I mean, with Wu-Tang, you really had to create this world that, you know, visually, I feel like we can all already picture, because, you know, the music is so vivid, the photographs are there. But I'm really curious to know how you dove into it, what those conversations were like, and yeah, just how you ended up with the beauty that's on the screen.
Yeah, Wu-Tang is really, that series is a really special project, because, you know, I ended up shooting, you know, for all 3 seasons and started with the pilot, and our director was Chris Robinson for the pilot, who's a great director, very kind of bold visually, you know, is a series director, film director, comes from music videos. So, you know, all of that kind of has a great depth of, you know, kind of a well of experience and vision. But for that series is interesting because it was very ambitious, right? So you have the Wu-Tang Clan, which again is kind of an iconic hip hop group for fans and folks that know, you know, the music, the culture. There's, like you said, there's a lot of references of in the 90s, that time period. And of course they were one of the you know, and still are one of the biggest groups around. So there's all that. But then with the series, what was interesting about the series and what I loved about the script, and it was kind of daunting for everyone, was that it was very ambitious in setting up that universe. So the first season, you know, starts in Staten Island, and it's like, you know, part family drama. There's family relationships, that whole dynamic. It's part kind of crime saga, very deliberate. You know, that's the truth of where the stories come from, is that, you know, these guys were all in a lot of them were in Staten Island and New York area, and a lot of kind of intersecting struggles with selling and all this stuff, and rivalries and trying to kill each other. I mean, it's like all this is based on these fascinating true story. So you have the family drama, the crime drama, but it's also, you know, of course, the music as a means of expression and kind of a raw way for these characters, you know, these characters to have a release and connect with each other, and a means for them to aspire to step out of the kind of struggles and challenges that they're in. So all this is kind of mixed together with, of course, knowing that, you know, this is based on a real group. So you're balancing all that with this still kind of a hero origin story. I mean, that was very kind of intentional too from the beginning, is so you know that these characters are going to one way or another end up to be the Wu-Tang Clan. So it's not a mystery in that fact. So, but and so you want to ground the story in all the real circumstances and reality of that situation, while still it's a bit of a paradox, still kind of building icons in the same way. So it's just kind of like Chris and I and the whole team, and with the showrunner Rizzo, of course, and Alex, and the whole, it was kind of trying to find this balance of larger than life but still grounded at the same time. And of course, most importantly, because this series, you're trying to connect with these characters, and you're setting up that first pilot in the season, you're setting up really a whole bunch of layers of complex relationships. There's a lot of characters, a lot of rivalries, a lot of there's a lot going on. And if you're like a deep dive Wu-Tang fan, you may know all that. But if you're coming in somewhere in the middle or not that familiar with Wu-Tang, of where these guys started out, then it has to also be accessible, right? It has to be a story, you know, it's a dramatic series that's gonna have peaks and valleys and twists and turns. And so that was ambitious. The the beginning, there's a couple things going on. It was a hero origin story, but also it did need to feel, this came from the showrunners and director, it's like the beautiful, Chris would talk about, the beautiful struggle. It's like what very conscious of not wanting to be, frankly, was, black drug dealers, the cliches of all that, you know what I mean? Like that was very conscious. It's like, this is not a, whatever that term meant, it doesn't, an urban something, it's like, no, this is a story about real people. It's a complex story about human beings trying to figure out their way in the world through complicated circumstances. So like, that was tricky because it had to feel, there, as written and in the story, there's in those first few episodes, there's violence, there's all these things going on, and you might have a certain perception coming in, or like a preconceived notion of what that should look like or what that should be. But our intention was definitely to make sure it's character first, and that there's a certain stature to these people's lives that we kind of set up. So it was, it's dark and dramatic, and it was coming out of the shadows and the rain, literally in the first kind of 10, 15 minutes. I mean, the whole show is set up. The first thing you see in the show is essentially a young Raekwon doing a drive-by on Ghost's family. And these guys aren't Raekwon and Ghost, they're, the real guys, it's like, so, and you come out of that, and then he goes to Bobby, who's Riz's house, Raekwon, and they have a conversation to hide this gun. So like, it starts in a very, and this is all within a few blocks of Staten Island, Park Hill and Stapleton, these two projects. So it's like, all this starts actually very micro in this microcosm. It's all about those dynamics and how they all knew each other and they're brothers, but there's rivalries, and there's trying to survival and stay out of prison and get back and aspire to music at the same time. And there's a lot of failures in that first season. The first season takes a long time to kind of set up all of this. It's not like they just, it's not your normal kind of, okay, now they're look, introduce our characters. Now they have a couple hurdles, but now they're the WU-TANG Clan. Look at it. No, it takes 3 seasons to tell that whole story, and a lot of twists and turns, which I think is, of course, based on the reality of the story, but also by design, to make sure it's a really thick, really layered tapestry of all these intersecting stories. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but we had references from a lot of sources. We built a lookbook with Chris, the director, and but it had to be kind of a nuanced, a dramatic look, but a very kind of nuanced. I don't know how else to describe it, but like, we were really trying to make sure we had portrait frames in those first few episodes, because again, there's so many different characters that you're introducing, and want to make sure that there were always images that could, at least the intention was try to capture, in terms of how the light's hitting a character, mixed color temperature kind of environment, out of the shadows, a lot of silhouettes, a lot of kind of cutting out our characters in very graphic ways, so that you kind of imprint these images of these characters in your head before you go on the journey.
That's really interesting.
But, it's, and it is a kind of sprawling, ambitious, as written. Again, there's just a lot to it. It's not like 3 characters we're following or 2. There's the whole family and the brothers and sisters and all this. So it was keeping track and kind of making sure we were, you literally kind of explore different neighborhoods and parts of the environment with these characters. So it's definitely moving in and out of different color palettes and kind of color, stamps for these different looks and worlds, so that you know where you are. I mean, it's all kind of, and then back home into the home base, and then one thing Chris said was interesting too, is it's like the beginning starts, it was the Lord of the Rings analogy, but it was like, starts in the Shire. Like, it starts it's a quest, right? It's like, if you really expand on it, the whole series is a quest that these characters start in the Shire, and their home base is Stapleton, their own struggles, have to go on this journey to become the best versions of themselves and aspire to something greater. So it's a really dramatic arc, right? So, but it definitely had that quality of wanting to go in towards an epic kind of an epic larger than life feel, which we just finished the 3rd season, and it hasn't come out yet, so I can't talk about it too much, but it definitely, the universe keeps expanding every season. We have a few episodes this season that take steps even further into their own realms and stylistic.
Cool.
We get to push the style. So it's like, it starts, the first thing is very grounded in that reality, and it's literally all, and now as the WU-TANG kind of universe, the culture of that, the music, the personas, the characters, that each kind of like, it's this growing, and this kind of big bang of everything growing in all these directions at once, which is really fun. It was really kind of unique project to be part of, and I'm really grateful to be part of it. we had RZA directing 2 of the episodes himself, RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh wow.
The last couple
Wow.
episodes, which was a beautiful, you know, he's a showrunner, it's his show with Alex C, but what's great about him directing, you know, he's obviously showrunner, so he's been around and has very much been involved in there, but directing every day, you know, all on set, his version of his own story is a fascinating process to be a part of, because I mean, you're talking about, interesting, Nico, like you know, the camera on yourself, you know, as a kid, but like him as a writer, you know, because he's a filmmaker as well. He's directed before, you know, he's a artist, kind of renaissance artist of all these, you know, at this point in his career. But seeing him process and working with him as he's, you know, narrativizing a version of, you know, what things have to be accurate and very specific to how things happen, and a certain tone or texture, or from wardrobe to, you know, the feel of the light, how the camera should see, or just perspective of a certain moment of reality from 25 years ago. But then also the narrative aspect. We're making a narrativized series of certain events, have been, you know, and characters and moments
change so that the narrative makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, he's able to do that balance in real time. You know, we prepped really well together and spent a lot of time. But then also on the day, we'll be inspired by certain moments based on something that happens. And we had a couple of these this particular real epic episode that's just its own other wild kind of universe. But it was a
That's
fun
awesome.
journey. Yeah.
Wow, what an interesting thing to work with a director that's almost telling his own story, you know, and it's a story that more than written, it's sort of living in pop culture in a lot of the ways. So that must be a really, really interesting challenge. Also visually, I'm sure for you to bring that about and how it feels, so that, you know, it feels adequate to their vision and their world. That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, and you know, just him. So the Wu-Tang Clan is a whole group of, you know, 9 to 10 guys. So, and obviously all the other characters involved. But so it gets very meta very quickly, because you have the whole right. We have a whole wonderful cast playing these characters. So then, you know, I mean, it's like an alternate version of the Wu-Tang.
Right. Right.
You know, Ashton Sanders is a lovely actor playing RZA. And then, and it's almost like you can see working with RZA, there's moments where he'll look at it and he's processing like, oh, I mean, can you imagine like a version of your own life? Like someone's playing you, your best friend, and this is your
hilarious.
Kind of like, okay, what is the essence of this moment of what we're trying to tell with the story? That is the reality of whatever we're trying to say. But then now we're putting in the capsule. Now we're on a soundstage and it's on a set, and this version of the, you know, it gets pretty wild pretty quickly. But it was a really fun process to be kind of plugged in right in the vortex of all that kind of creative energy. It was very unique, and it was great to be working with Riz at the end of the series, because I'd been at the series from the beginning. So it's like, this is his world and story, but I've also been, you know, a key part of the process of how we're telling this particular story. Right. Like as a cinematographer would be in any other project that you've worked on a long time. So visually, in terms of how we've been, the language of how we've done the story, or certain moments, or how it makes sense to push this moment camera wise or lighting wise, and have those conversations.
And you're the one constant, right? So,
right.
So you're carrying the cohesiveness of the whole show. And yeah, so I totally agree with you with that. Yeah.
Well, Nico, I know there's not much you can give away when it comes to CHUPA, but I am curious, and I'll kind of change the question a little, because I would like to know if you can get into the prep process of that. But I'd also love to hear a little bit about how you went about building trust with Jonas, and, you know, because that's one of the most important things in your relationship with a director is just, you know, you both have to truly trust each other. So yeah, I mean, just expand on that.
Absolutely. I wanted to add a quick thing, which is I worked on this one day as a camera operator on this Wu-Tang Clan documentary, where they're all in this room. It's called, I think Mass Appeal did it because I was doing a different documentary with them, and it just happened to coincide and I was available. And it was extremely exciting because, you know, it was all the Wu-Tang Clan in the same room watching, I think, videos of themselves. And it was beautiful to watch. I mean, I was just an additional camera operator, but I could sense just from that one day, you know, what incredible energies you must have been dealing with, and you know, these awesome stories that, you know, they obviously were reminiscing about. So I definitely recognize a little bit of I'm sure what great benefits you got from it, and yeah, that's the show looks awesome. So congratulations on it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. You got a taste of it. Yeah, it's definitely its own unique, you know, unique universe. I don't know how to describe it. It's its own unique, you know, they've, and obviously, you know, we just saw them at the bowl, the Hollywood Bowl a couple weeks, whenever that was, a couple weeks ago. It was great to see. I've been in the alternate reality 90s version. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh yeah, the WU-TANG Clan 2022. Oh yeah, whoa. It was great. But yeah, sorry, never know.
No, that's awesome. I just want to say that. No, so I did CHUPA with Jonas Cuaron. The first thing I want to say is that I think, you know, I am so grateful to have shot that beautiful, beautiful project, because everyone around me was just so incredibly talented. And, you know, the production designer, the art director, the costume designer, everyone around me was just reaping and exuding so much inspiration that when I came into the project, it was hard not to, you know, myself be so inspired by it. And Jonas is probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. But he's also incredibly attuned emotionally as a director. He is incredibly aware. And working with him was an incredible experience, mostly because I was learning every single day by every single conversation I was having with him, because he his level of standard for storytelling is so high that every single decision that you have to make influences that, down to, you know, the color of a wall, to the position of a light, to whether the camera is 5 millimeters to the right or to the left. This is this amazing visionary director who understands, and not only demands, but understands how all of these things will influence your story. So it was an incredible gift for me to learn from someone like that, who every day could you know, remind me of the value of all these different decisions, and then eventually forming an incredible partnership with him, in that we would create this beautiful back and forth and the synergy of how we're going to make decisions together. And of course, we wouldn't agree all the time. We still don't. But that's the beauty of it, is when there's that freedom of being completely in tune with your artistic integrity, you know, and that has a lot to do with compatibility, of course, because artistic integrity could sometimes not be compatible with someone else's artistic integrity, but there has to be that, right? There has to be truth and honesty behind every decision you make, behind every argument, along with respect, with the vision of a director. So to answer your question, Maria, you know, I didn't know Jonas before. So when I started the project, it was a whole new experience for me to, you know, understand how he looks at this movie, what's my interpretation of the script. And there was a lot of that, you know, a lot of these conversations that were sort of weaving the net that would be our partnership. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of conversations, and it takes a lot of you know, being there and being completely committed, which is the hardest part about this industry, because I feel like the only way to truly be in this industry and be involved in it is to give everything, you know, give your all, like give 1000%. But that's the only way that you can create these incredible partnerships, or to, you know, be really invested in your project and make sure that every single decision that you're making as a head of a department is the best decision you could have made at that time. So, but yes, I'm very excited for the movie to come out. It'll come out next year, and I'm so excited to see what it all looks like and how it all works, because there's a lot of effects, but there's a lot of technical challenges, there's a lot of creative challenges, and I'm just so grateful for Netflix, for the producers, and of course Jonas. Yeah.
You just touched on this, and it's a topic I really did want to dive into because I don't think it's really addressed enough. But you mentioned how you have to be completely immersed in the project. You have to give it your all completely.
Yes.
Your obsession with it has to be all encompassing.
Yes.
But I mean, that really is a sacrifice. And I grew up in this world. My dad works in film. I grew up, he'd be gone for very long stretches of time. And I knew from a very young age that I wanted to also work in this industry. But I literally always told myself, I will not have a family. I just knew, I was in order to be fully immersed in this. I mean, my dad was very fortunate to have an amazing woman by his side who raised me and my sister. But for me, I was well, I don't want to rely on a husband. So I've kind of just had that in my head. I will sacrifice that aspect in order to fully immerse myself into directing. So I'm curious, Gavin, I'll start with you, whether, you felt like you've had to sacrifice aspects of your life in order to reach the point that you're at.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. And I know, yeah, it is, right? It's a constant, right? I mean, it's a constant juggling act. I have a family, I have a wife and son who's 9 years old, and actually have an older daughter who's in her 20s now as well. Yeah, it's something, frankly, it's never easier. The more you do it, this is my own experience, of course, the more you do it, you figure out ways to navigate and what works better, and not from being, frankly, away from home for big stretches of time. And my wife, Danielle, and I have been together a long time. So, it's not new now. It's not, it's something we know how to do a dance, and she's fortunately very independent. And so we can do that, but it's hard. I don't like going away from home. As I get older, it's it's one thing, and I'm glad you have the insight to kind of think about that. I've already been thinking about that from a younger age. When I was starting out, it was I thought about it, but I was also, I was motivated to go. I was this would be great. If I'm fortunate enough to get far enough that I can shoot and travel and do this, it's gonna be really great. We'll figure it out. And then, you live through it, and you have to figure it out. You have to actually figure out, okay, now I'm going to be gone for X amount of months. And, I need to stay in town for a few months to try to be at home and try to not be gone all the time. And, it's you just figure out every step, but and it's tricky because, every time I come home, there's a couple weeks at least of who's this? I'm back in this house, and I know you're my husband, but we got this whole thing worked. We got this whole system where right now we love you, but and I'm hey, first of all, hey, I'm here. Now I got to plug back. It's this whole dance. It's this whole kind of reorienting, recalibrating every time. It's fascinating, and it's coming. And you still got to figure it out and get on the same page. And and same thing when you're leaving. It's awful to leave, and then you're working somewhere. Nico obviously hit on it right on the head. It's you're all in, right? When you're working. Generally, if you're passionate about what you're doing, which hopefully we are, because it takes a lot. But yeah, it's you're all in. So when I'm working on wherever I am, even if it's here, I'm working, I'm all in. But the hours are long. I'm all in. That's what's occupying my mind. So it's definitely it's a bit, it's a bit of a world of extremes. I think our lives, right? One way, it's kind of one way or another. And
that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And the two feel each other, right? I mean, I definitely try in my time off or time between projects, it's you're feeding yourself, creatively, at least, whether that's and soul, for your soul. It's time with family, time with friends, reconnecting with colleagues or folks I haven't seen in a while. It's obviously trying to catch up on the millions of, films and series that I wasn't able to, Well, I was working the past few months. It's hiking, it's being outside, it's museums, it's photography. It's like just a refueling period I try to find, which is super important. You know, I think earlier on I was, you know, I was aware of that, but like it was just like work. You know, it was like the kind of drive and ambition of trying to make sure I keep working all the time, and you know, it was like I didn't give myself enough to those kind of recharge times, which I find that are actually really extremely important for me.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
For me to actually like acknowledge and appreciate, and for your sanity, like you're saying, it's like it's not just like a, you know, it's not just like a bonus time, or it's actually an integral part of the process of doing at least, you know, for me, being able to be successful. I don't mean successful careers, but like functional, and as an artist, you know, as a cinematographer, be able to give my all when I'm on those projects. I need to be able to balance it as best I can. It's not easy or great. I mean, but you also figure out, like during the pandemic, of course, this could be a whole other thing, but you know, we were fortunate. I was working in New York on WU-TANG, and then also this pilot, the Equalizer pilot, Queen Latifah, and so I ended up being there for a long stretch. And my wife's a teacher, and my son was this was still when things were online, kind of pre-vaccines. And so we're like, this is one unique time that we could all be together. We all went out to New York, lived out, we were all together. They were, you know, online remotely, LA, you know, it had its challenges. We were in the middle of a pandemic, but it was also very fortunate that we could all be together for 6 months or whatever it was, and in an apartment in New York, and figured out and made it work. And that was a beautiful kind of, obviously, it's amidst the pandemic and a lot of, you know, a lot going on in the world, but at least we were together, and we were able to do that. Obviously, a lot of folks didn't have that, you know, weren't able to do that, but it was something that was a beautiful moment that we could at least try to. So it's like, and every time, you know, they try to travel, but now that my son's in school, those first few years, you have a little more wiggle room, but when your kid or kids are in school, it gets a little tricky to kind of have them travel with you. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know, Nico, what about you?
I think what you're mentioning, I totally identify with. One thing that you made me think about is that, you know, when you said that this industry is kind of a world of extremes, because I mean, I'm trying to remember, but I don't think there's been a project that I haven't done where I don't feel like I'm redlining at some point. You know, like if we're gonna be honest with ourselves, like there's days that you are redlining, you know, where you're just like going really hard, and you know, you realize that, you know, you're gonna have to get up in the morning and do that, or you're gonna have to get up in the morning and get on a flight to do the next thing. And it's like there's serious questions of sustainability when you know, I think of that, because I'm like, okay, well, where's that time for my own health, for example? You know, where's my own time for building a family, or, you know, having time with the family, or just recuperating artistically, you know, finding an outlet in which you can let your creativity energy build up again. But it's a really tough thing, because I'm sure other people have said it similar, but we're also so lucky to be working in this industry. You know, like, are you kidding me? We don't have to sit in a 9-to-5 job. We get to go and tell stories and use these awesome cameras and decide where to put the light, and, you know, talk with filmmakers and make friends and have people feel like family. Like, are you kidding me? That is a dream job. But why is it that sometimes I feel like I can't, you know, complain about that? You know, why is it that I can't recognize that there are some unhealthy aspects of the requirements? And the worst part about all of this is that I know all of this, and yet I have zero, you know, sustainable solutions. I'm sure other people have better solutions or have solutions, period. But when I think about it, I'm like, well, no, because my next project, I actually want to be all in. And like, I want to not sleep. I want to like have this be the only thing I think about. but then another side of me is like, man, that is not sustainable. So I personally feel so conflicted because I'm
Mm.
like, part of me actually wants this redlining because I feel like it's the only way that I'm going to fully achieve what I want to achieve and the quality that I want to achieve it for myself, let alone the project, just for myself. This is what I want. But then another side of it is like, man, like, what is this outlook? You know, like, how is this sustainable? Um, what do you guys think about that idea?
I mean, Gavin kind of touched on it. Like, it sounds really fantastic that you've been able to take the time to recuperate between projects. And I'm curious if that's because you have kind of gotten more into, TV series where you have that hiatus and you know that there'll be another season later on. Like, do you feel like maybe that kind of gives you that room to breathe?
Yeah, no, it's honestly, it depends. I mean, I just finished the Wu-Tang series. Yeah, but I didn't know, for example, I was doing the third season when season 2 ended because they hadn't announced it and I was on something else. Like, it just depends on the timing. I mean,
Mhm.
frankly, sometimes I feel more comfortable like, okay, I'm going to pass on this, or I'm not going to actively push for something else or this because yes, I know season X is going to come around in a few months, and at least gives me some peace of mind. But sometimes no, and then sometimes I don't feel comfortable. Frankly, sometimes I'm like, no, I should. This project's come up or whatever. The way this all lines up, I should just do it. And it's hard on us, and we have to figure it out. But we all talk about it as a family. But yeah, it's never. And maybe some folks can have figured out, like you're saying, Nico, I don't know the solutions. Some folks maybe figure out a better way to deal. But I find that it depends on the circumstances of the moment. Like,
Yeah. So
or, like, it depends
yeah,
what the last year has been like for you both, work, how busy you've been, fortunate or not. It depends how you feel, right? I mean, sometimes,
sure.
like, I gotta be honest, like, coming off Wu-Tang, which is great, I had been working, I was on Little America right into Wu-Tang. Like, I finished Little America, which is a beautiful series. And the next morning got on a plane, that kind of thing.
Wow. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
one of those, right?
Yep.
So
One of
fine,
those.
great. I was fortunate again, like you're saying. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if we're smart, we're grateful to be able to. I mean, what an amazing thing we get to do every day. So it's like, I'm
Right.
grateful, fortunate, but it's also like, okay, I've been working. It's the flip side. That's like, I'm spent. By the time I finished shooting, it was great, but I was also like, I need, I actually need physically. I'm spent mentally, I'm spent emotionally, I'm spent. I need a little recharge moment. I just can't. It wouldn't be healthy, nor would it be, frankly, good artist.
No, of
Mentally,
course. Yeah.
that's what you're saying. It's not just a physical kind of stamina thing, or like it's also artistically.
Oh,
It's like,
100%.
I find that, yeah, I actually need the moment to kind of rebalance, recalibrate, even if it's a few weeks, or it depends on what it is, to, like, yes, catch up on sleep and get back into shape a little bit, but also kind of just, I don't know, it's like a palate cleanse, like an artistic, like a creative palate cleanse, in order to be ready for the next, marathon, essentially, whatever it is, if it's going to be a long form
I
thing.
totally agree. I totally agree with that. Yeah, I was the only thing I was going to interject with that is that I feel like, personally, for me, when I feel creatively spent, it starts truly affecting me at my intuition level.
Mm,
And as artists, we really have to rely on our intuition because it has, so much more depth of knowledge than our prefrontal cortex and our, immediate thoughts could ever have. Because I believe that our intuition has access to everything we have learned, and sometimes even things we are yet to learn. It's like, that's the magic of being an artist, is that we are fueled by this energy that we can almost not understand, that
mm.
we could call our intuition. And that's what I never want to feel sacrificed, like, because that's when I'm shooting and I'm composing and I'm lighting and I look at the frame, I get sometimes this feeling of like, this is right. And or I'll get a feeling of like, this isn't right, but this would be right. And it's like this amazing moment of tapping into that, like, pool of endless knowledge and intuitive I guess, creativity that is so fulfilling. Like it just makes me feel like I'm making the right choices. They feel right. They look right. They're telling the story right. And when I'm spent and when I'm redlining, I've sometimes felt like I'm on set and the voice of my intuition starts becoming a little bit more quiet. And I
Hmm.
have to work way extra harder to bring it out again. And I've had moments where I literally will wake up in the morning and it'll be completely quiet. And I'll have to meditate or do something to either drown out my, louder thoughts, or to try to resurface that creativity thought or intuition. And I realize that that's what I focus on whenever I'm taking a hiatus or whenever I'm focusing on not working, is I try to do everything in my power to empower my intuitive creative thoughts.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. That's an interesting way to, I know what you mean. It's and that makes me think, I mean, because I've been in episodic mostly recently, it's a marathon, not a sprint on episodic, right? So
Right.
it's like,
Right.
it's whatever it is, even if you're just doing a pilot is more like a feature maybe, but or shorter, but if you're doing 10 episodes of something, or you're alternating, because I'm alternating on these shows, whatever, you're still doing X amount of months, 4 or 5 months. And that's just, there's a point, no matter how much you love the project, where, like you're saying, the stamina, it's like, it's a creative endurance test,
Oh,
right?
100%.
There'll be a point where you're like, okay, I still love what we're doing, but it's like, because I can't get the proper sleep or break or just reset moment, I'm fatigued. It's a bit of a fatigue. And so it's accessing, like, okay, how do I, like you're saying, how you're putting it, redlining, it's definitely a constant kind of, it can be a challenge for sure.
It
Yeah.
can, and
Yeah.
also your presence with your collaborators, I think,
Yes.
also suffers, because you're going to be the most present when you're not having other things occupy your mind, such as like, holy shit, I'm really tired, or oh my god, I'm redlining, I need to, take a break, or all these things sometimes come up, and I think that we are in such a collaborative medium that it's almost our responsibility as, head of department, and especially as cinematographers, to be extremely available to collaborate
Mm.
and to be extremely involved in a conversation that will influence the project you're working on with your director or with your production designer or whoever it is. And that's one of the parts that I always am extremely vigilant on, because if
Mhm.
I'm having an important conversation and suddenly my mind starts asking me like, wait, have you drunk enough water? Are you feeling a little woozy? Have you eaten enough? That's so detrimental, because that's affecting your ability to collaborate as well.
Right.
So I do think, to a certain extent, it's like, you said it really well, which is that it all depends on so many circumstances and variables. It's like, what is the project? Where does it shoot? How do you feel? Are you already tired, or do you have all this energy? But I think that it's a responsibility as filmmakers for us to create awareness as much as possible to our own selves and our own limits, and our own mental health, forming the language to talk about and understand how we're feeling and what is our immediate intellectual and emotional availability,
Mhm.
and being able to be realistic about that and be like, fuck, I'm not available right now because I'm stressed out of my mind, or I'm completely, forgetting to drink water on set, or I haven't sat down in 10 hours. It's like, I found that the only way that I can go through a project is like being so brutally honest and in tune with how I feel, and having actionable plans to address those things, so that I can actually be available. And if I can address those things within, a few hours or a few minutes sometimes, then that means it's time for a break. And then also being realistic about that,
Yeah. Sorry, this conversation is great. And what I feel like is, just in my limited, experience the past couple years, I feel like these kind of conversations, even with folks I'm working with, are happening a bit more, obviously mental health in general, but like, which is good. It's like, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's my own frame of reference or not, but I feel like that really, even with producers or with, because it is, everybody's all in with the producers, directors, cast, like these, at least the conversations are starting to, happen with the people we're working with, where I feel like a few years ago, obviously this is an overgeneralization, but like, I feel like it would just, a given would be, you kind of don't really talk about it, right? We're always, just the simple thing of like, which is still, pre-pandemic would be like, when we're sick, I don't know about, unless I couldn't walk, I would, I'm a DP on something, if it's important, I'm expected, I got a flu, it's like.
Well, it was a badge of honor, like saying that you worked 20 hours, like it was like, oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or the hours, right? Which have all, all these things are kind of coming through we're still in the pandemic, but, coming through that whole terrain of the pandemic is kind of wait a second, what are we doing? A lot of these conversations coming in like, wait a second, this isn't healthy what we were doing. This isn't sustainable. Like you're saying, this isn't, like, how can we look at these things in a different way that opens it. So I'm glad those conversations are happening, because it definitely, I can think of some of the hours on some of these things were just, they're not sustainable. They're not safe. They're not sustainable.
Yes.
They're not healthy. And the work's, look, the work, like you're saying, if you're not, it's like, if you're not able to if everybody's not in the right headspace all the time, that's how those days get, you can shoot much more efficiently if everyone's had some sleep, and, you'll make your days, you'll make better work, and you can actually shoot quicker and more efficient than these days that drawn out, and you're shooting fratter days, and then you're coming back, Monday morning, like, and then no one slept. It's like, these things there's real impacts on what you're actually creating. So I'm glad that these conversations are happening. People are actually starting to address them.
I agree. Well, Nico, you go.
Oh, sorry. No, I interrupted. No, I was just going to say that I think that a big detriment to all of this is that there's this unspoken expectation that you need to be a superhuman when you're working, right? And unfortunately, there's so many people that also want to work that there's this idea of like, okay, well, there's always someone else. And that is a fear that all of us filmmakers live with, and that's why I think we stretch it ourselves even more, because we know in the back of our heads, there's always someone else,
Yeah.
And that is, I think, a really toxic way of thinking about yourself and your value. And I've certainly been a victim to it myself. And that is, I think, what creates sometimes these, this willingness of like, all right, I will work 30 hours, all right, I will sustain this. I won't say a peep or anything. So I do think that it has to be a two structured thing. One of them is your self-awareness, but the other one is, yes, there has to be actually some changes in the industry so that people aren't forced into unsafe situations. And I think Bradford Young has said it really well in other interviews where he talks about this and time with family, and those actionable changes are definitely something that would be good for any human in any industry.
Yeah, I've always found it quite ironic that we are storytellers and artists, but oftentimes we don't even have time to like have our own stories,
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's such a good point.
I could talk to you guys for the rest of the day. I want to ask one final question that does kind of stay on this topic though, but I guess would be a little bit beneficial for people listening is, have you guys found any rituals or you know, how do you center yourself while you're on a project? Like, are there little things that you do to kind of, you know, stop the redlining from happening? Or nothing?
Crickets. I'm kidding. You mean while I'm working? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think what. I mean, depends on where I am or what I'm doing, but I'm. What's the right way to answer that? I don't know. I mean, obviously trying to catch up on sleep on the weekends. Time where, you know, for me, it's even just basic. I mean, everybody's different, but for me, it is basic exercise. Like I found, I used to kind of go in and out of, you know, like when I was younger, in and out, like you physically, you could just push yourself further, frankly. You know what I mean? Not that I'm, you know, but like now it's like in the past few years, I'm like, oh yeah, no, if I can, it's not going to be consistent because on these crazy hours, I can't keep that on. But if I can constantly, or meditation or stretches, or even if it's just basic everyday kind of like moments where I can focus on myself physically to kind of reset, that makes a big difference. Because when I've taken that for granted, my kind of physical condition, it can definitely, you know, obviously mental and physical is all interrelated. So when you're hyper stressed and or fatigued, your body reacts, and that, you know, feeds back on itself in terms of mentally. And I can get physically just kind of out of whack, you know, like, oh, my back or oh, that. And it's like, I used to kind of just be able to power through those things. And I'm like, no, I need to make sure I'm physically feeling as balanced as I can. And that makes a big difference. And you're out of your head in a different way too. So that's something that I found that I'm trying to work on better. And just, even if the weekends are short or the time is short after you're working, it's trying to disconnect. I mean, it's tricky, like you're saying, Nico, because things will come up when you're not on set. You're depending on what you're doing, you're prepping or getting emails or texts or for regarding the next day, the next thing that's coming up or the set. It's like you can always be plugged in, and sometimes you have to be, but it's also sometimes trying to just disconnect for a certain amount of time and really focus on family or just taking a walk or just really trying to call someone on the phone I haven't talked to in a while. Like it sounds like really obvious things, but at least for me, it's easy to let those things go when, you know, you're in the midst of it and you're just so work oriented that you just have the blinders on. Nothing else exists out. I'm like, no, I have to, in order to stay sane, I got to take a little bit of time to do X, Y, or Z outside of that. But that's a perpetual challenge, right? I know it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
I totally agree. No, I completely agree. I would say exercise, diet, those two things, being healthy about them and realistic about them. And then for me personally, I try to do things that are as far away as possible from anything that has to do with filmmaking. And I'm very conscious that I do these things. Like I was taking flight lessons to learn how to fly a plane recently.
Oh, wow.
You know, I also love building guitars and playing guitar. I have a fascination for, you know, sometimes some mechanical things and working on a motor. You know, it's like, I try to do things that are as far away as possible, even, you know, reading novels that, you know, haven't been made into a movie, you know, things like that, that make me feel like I'm a human outside of filmmaking is the best recipe for me to come back to filmmaking with whole new ideas and whole new skills, and also a way to mentally separate myself from my diligence in my work to my personal care and who I am identity-wise as a human being outside of film, is what I would say.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up. I meant to mention music as well, because I play guitar, I played music a long time.
Oh, that's awesome.
But so that is a huge one, because it's a whole nother, it's creative, but it's overlapping wavelengths, but it's like, it's a different world that you can absolutely dive into and get in your own zone. It's not, you know, directly related to film. Yeah.
No, totally. I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
There's something very meditative about in your headspace with music. So that's a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, before we log off, do you guys have any final thoughts or advice or any bits of wisdom, or are you tapped out?
I just want to
Um,
thank Gavin really for I'm glad to meet you, Gavin. I think you brought so many interesting things, and I'm sure you have maybe a couple of more to say, but I just wanted to thank you, Maria, as well, and Gavin, yeah, for allowing me to talk to you guys. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you both for for this conversation and for having me on, Maria, and everything. I mean, like I was saying at the beginning, the series has been great. And just building community, we didn't talk about it too much, but building, community with other artists, cinematographers,
Yes.
just general, we all have our own relationships, but even though we're not all in the same room having this conversation, it's really fruitful and beneficial. It's great to meet you all. And like, this is what we need, you're really adding by having this series, you're really putting this out into the world in a really beautiful way, because it's sparking other conversations and other, it's all part of the community. So yeah, thank you for this series and having me on.
No, honest, it was a true honor. Like, these always make me feel so whole afterwards, hearing different perspectives from artists I really admire. It always, it's incredibly inspiring. And yeah, just thank you both for your time. It's been a pleasure. Gavin, you're welcome to the little Mexican friend group.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
And yeah, thanks to all of our audience members for listening and for supporting this platform. And yeah, just listening to these artists discuss their crafts and, all the topics that we touched on today. I think we hit on some really important conversations. And yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, watch our videos on YouTube, and subscribe to our podcast. And follow us on Instagram, to get the updates on our upcoming roundtables. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.